Hello, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Broski Doodles. Your host, like always, Kiko Cervantes, with you every week, bringing you the fire, the seasoning, the fixings, alright? All the fucking goodies. Today I want to speak about something that's a bit more personal. Something that has to do with my life. It is a topic that I haven't really talked about specifically in the past. I've touched some things regarding this on the podcast, but never went in depth. And I think it's important for the people that listen to this podcast to know a bit of what's happening in my country, where I'm from, Venezuela. Not only what's happening now, but how everything started over there. For some of you that might know a little bit of it, then maybe I can clarify some things. And for those of you that don't know anything, then maybe I can bring some light into the situation that's going on, okay? So we're going to talk about Venezuela. How did it get to where it's at now? How did that all started over 20 years ago? And what are my thoughts about how it can improve, if anything. So that's gonna be what we're gonna be touching on. To start on this, well, first let me have a little cervecita or beer, because this is gonna be a deep one. Keep in mind that my analysis is coming from someone that simply lived it. Okay, I'm not an expert in politics. I'm not a historian. So if anything I say, I'm not accurate with specific dates and things like that, I am sort of telling it to you how I saw it, but I have no intent in not expressing the true reality of things. Another disclaimer that I wanted to say before I start speaking about this topic is that even though I would normally lean more on the right of spectrum of things, I would consider myself center right, if anything, more of a libertarian myself, but I want it to be understood that because of that, I'm not going to be biased towards what I think about what's happening in Venezuela with the socialist regime that's in place. And so I want to be just very clear that I'm going to be telling my experiences and not things that I made up, because I really want people to have a clear understanding. So I'm not going to be on any side of the political spectrum regarding left or right. I'm going to concentrate really on the situation that is attacking Venezuela. To start off, we need to go back to about 1989. In 1989, which is the year that I was born, again, I might be not 100% accurate by a year or two, but this is pretty much how it happened. There was this guy, this military guy called Hugo Chavez, which you probably heard this name before. This guy wanted to do a coup and take over the government along with, other soldiers, right? Because at the time, there was a lot of protest, and you could say that there was a bit of a crisis in Venezuela. When you look at it from the future back, it was not really a bad crisis, but let's just say it was the worst the country had been in many years. So Chavez in 89 tries to do this coup to sort of take over and get on government, but he gets caught. It's flawed. It's not successful. He gets caught. He goes to jail as a political, as a political personnel, or I think whether we call it political prisoner. I guess not even. I'm talking shit here. Political prison will be. I mean, this guy was just going against the law. I mean, he was doing criminal shit, trying to take over a government by violence. So, yeah, he just went to jail, right? He stayed in jail for a while. And I believe around 95 or 96, the president in place in Venezuela lets Chavez out. You know how sometimes presidents do this presidential pardon? Well, they did that with Chavez, and Chavez was let free. And it seemed like he was sort of getting this momentum of being this person that's like against the system, you know. He became like a very populist person, and he started like campaigning to become president, using the whole story of being a martyr, because he was sent to jail for being a criminal, but you know, he could use that as like, you know, the system corrupted, put me in jail, now I'm coming out with more force, something like that. Now, up to now, Venezuela was a growing economy, and I remember having a really good childhood. My dad was a businessman. He made good money. We had a good upbringing, right? There was another side of this. There were a lot of people that were poor, most of the people in the country. And there's a whole lot of factors that affect that, as to why that happens, right? One of them being, I mean, you have to take into account that the culture, or yeah, I'm not using the right word, but the one that comes to mind is just the culture of the people is not as organized to excel in life. What I mean by that is, in European countries, you have a lot more of conscious people regarding not wanting to have babies too soon, because you want to first be stable economically. You see that as well in the US, not as much as in Europe. And then in America, South America, in Venezuela, you see it less and less, especially with the poor classes, right? So you have a lot of growing population in these barrios, hoods, favelas, some of the biggest slums in the world, and there's definitely a problem there. So for many years, since the 70s, we've had two political parties. You could say sort of like in the US, where it is the Democratic and the Republicans, but in Venezuela it was really more like Democrats and less Democrats, because in South America, especially in those times, it's hard to see anything that's really on the right, because everything's about social programs for the poverty that exists. So really all you had was left, and then, you know, not so left, but still left. And, you know, they were all corrupt and they would steal money, but the country sort of ran. But people got mad that there was corruption, and people got mad that there was poverty. So there were some things that needed to change, right? In my opinion, and a really good cleanup regarding corruption, and a reorganization of the people in power that have to do with judges, the people that actually execute laws, and make those people not corruptible. And that's really the main problem in South America, is just corruption, regardless of what, left or right, you know. So pretty much at that time, you know, we had these two parties. Like I was saying, Chavez comes through and he's like, look, I'm a martyr. I just came out of jail around 96. And in 98, there were going to be elections. 1998. So he ran, right? He ran on a lot of populist stuff. You know, we're going to help the poor. But he also ran saying we're going to help the companies and shit. I remember my dad telling me, it was crazy. My dad, the day that he won the presidency in 1998, I remember the day. My dad literally just like went upstairs. We started looking for our passports. Like, I'm not gonna say we started making a suitcase that day, because we couldn't leave that day. But my dad planned it all for us to leave right away. Right away. And he understood what was gonna happen when Chavez won. Chavez won legitimately one time, and that was in 1998. In 1998, he had a majority of the votes, and he became president of Venezuela. He was backed by a lot of companies, a lot of investors, just like it happens in any elections. You know, there's always people you gotta pay favors to once you're in power. And so at the end of the day, it was just corruption. The thing is, this corruption that was gonna take place, disguised as a social, populist, socialist government, but really a corruption scheme. The difference from the past, besides the more evil people that were gonna be part of it, is that they also had a connection with Cuba and Fidel Castro's people, right? Even before Chavez became president, he was always, like when he was in the military, he was always interested in the doctrine in Cuba. And if I'm not mistaken, he even went a few times over there to sort of get guidance from the fucking oracle. And he came back, and pretty much he had some sort of alliance with Castro if he was to win. And he did win. And in 1998, he won. Now, what are the things that Chavez starts doing, or at least starts presenting that he's going to do? At the beginning, a lot of it has to do with help, right? This is why there's a misconception in the world. People always, not always, but some people that don't really know the situation in Venezuela still remember Chavez like someone that, he really wanted to help people, but maybe it was the people that was with him that kind of fucked it all up. And no, like, Chavez was a fucking monster from the get-go, He did create a lot of social programs, and that was one of the main things that he would push for, right? Social programs to help people. Venezuela, when Chavez won, the petroleum went from about $24 a gallon to like $120 a gallon. It was like a 500% increase. It was insane how much more expensive petrol became. And for people that don't know, Venezuela is the country that has the largest oil reserves in the world, right? Even more than Saudi Arabia. So you have this guy, Chavez, who's the perfect villain. He has connections with Castro, so he knows all the rule books on how to control a system, a society, right? Now he has pretty much unlimited money because petrol gallon just went up 500%. I mean, he was already banking, but now even more. And you say, wait, why was he banking? I mean, the petroleum, does he keep it? So what happens is Chavez pretty much takes over the what's called PDVSA, PDVSA. This is the company, the state company that runs the oil business, right? So they're the ones that are in charge of collecting the oil in the country, refining it, selling it, etc., right? Well, a long ass time ago, like in the 70s, they nationalized that company. It used to be a private company, right? And then the government's like, no, we're gonna take over. And normally when a government takes over, I'm not really down for that shit. It's better when it works on a private sector. It works better, in my opinion. But in the 1970s, they nationalized it. This means that the government controls and oversees everything that has to do with oil production. And for many years, yeah, there was corruption, but for the most part, shit worked, We sold gasoline to other countries. We were able to refine the gasoline for our own country. Because keep in mind, you can have oil, petrol. Well, I don't want to confuse, because I know that in some places petrol means gasoline. But what I mean is oil, crude oil. You can have a lot of it, but that doesn't mean you have gasoline. Gasoline, which is one of the most refined substances down the line of refinement, it is not only expensive, but it takes a lot of knowledge and a lot of machinery and just a lot of fucking managerial structure to be able to produce gasoline out of oil. And in Venezuela, we had some of the best oil engineers in the world, because Venezuela, even though we have the largest oil reserves in the world, we also have one of the worst qualities of oil in the world. So it's a bit of a bitch, right? Like, we got a bunch of shit. Like imagine, you know what it is? It's like, hey, dude, open that storage And there's $5 million there, bro. $5 million. And it's all for you, bro. It's all for you. The only thing is, the bills are all cut in many pieces. So you just have to stitch them all together, and then you have $5 million. So it was a bitch, right? But Venezuelan engineers, Venezuelan scientists actually came up with techniques to be able to process this very crude oil. Imagine an oil that's very thick. So, and you have to convert that into like liquid gasoline. So imagine, the more viscosity it has, the harder it's gonna be to process it, But we found ways on how to do it. So we actually fucking pioneered certain technologies that allowed Venezuela's oil industry to fucking, boom. And this is not something that happened with Chavez in the past. We've been good with oil. My uncle is a mechanical engineer that ran one of the refineries. He was fired for not following the government. I'll touch on that in a bit, but so I know a bit of this. But we had great minds were working in these places. I mean, so much that other countries, Canada, Saudi Arabia, or different countries would come and try to get engineers from Venezuela because they knew how to process thicker and harder oils. And like Saudi Arabia, even though they don't have the largest reserve, they have one of the best oils. If I'm not mistaken, it's almost like it just comes out liquid right away. But there are places where they come up with a lot of oil, but it's sort of speak shitty oil. And in Venezuela, we had a lot of knowledge on how to take care of that because that was a condition that affected the oil that we had. All of it was this shit oil. Anyways, enough with the technical part, but I think it's important for you to know the ins and outs. So right. So we have all this oil. We're producing gasoline for us and for other countries. So much so that a glass of beer was more expensive than a tank of gasoline in your car. So that's how crazy it was. That's how cheap it was. That even it was so much like that gasoline was cheaper than water. Like bottled water was more expensive than gasoline. It was nothing, right? And I find that cool. Like if you have a country that produces a lot of something and they're able to subsidize the energy that country pays per citizen, that's fucking great. All right, cool. That's how it was for a long time. Chavez came, even though the government company PDVSA was already nationalized. It was done in a very administrative and efficient way, let's just say, right? With this little bits of corruption, but it worked, right? You had great people working on it. He came and he wanted to control all of it, right? Because why? Well, because that's the hen that lays the golden eggs, or the goose that lays the golden eggs. The oil, that's the only shit that we produce. So he wants to more than take over the production. He wants to take over the intake of money, right? So they take over the fucking petroleum. They start changing laws so that the president can stay longer, right? So 4 years after this guy is in presidency, there's a big strike for all the workers in the refineries because they're like, look, fuck this, we're stopping working, because they knew if they could stop the production of gasoline and oil, then you would cut the money that the government received. So they did that, and we almost were able to take out the president because there was so much protest. But there was one guy that was a traitor, and when we took Chavez on a helicopter to sort of take him to jail, straight to jail, the guy sort of saved them and sort of backstabbed the other side. Anyways, that's more deep shit. But in pretty much what happened is, in 2003 is when shit exploded in Venezuela, in the sense where people found out that this guy wanted to do extreme shit. instead of it being a 5-year term, he wanted to change it to 6. Or if I'm not mistaken, it was either 4 or 5-year terms. He wanted to make it 6, and he did through this shitty elections. Then he also wanted for you to be able to to be elected up to 3 times in a row as a president. And now, as we speak today, you can be elected undefinitively. So you can be president forever as long as the people elect you each time. And of course, like in Cuba, they get elected each time, you know. So, you know, it's a bit of a fuckfest. But anyways, let me follow a bit of the timeline I have here so I don't lose or miss anything. So there's a petrol strike along with these elections for policies that he wants to change to stay in power. People realize this motherfucker's crazy. Not everyone. Some people are still lost and think that, oh no, this guy wants to help the poor and all this shit. Which I'm going to get to how he helped the poor. So first of all, he grabs a list, right? He obtains a list which is called La lista de... What the fuck is... La lista de Chacón. La lista de Chacón or de Tacón. Something that... Chacón's or Tacón's list. Something like that. It's a guy's list that he made a list because he had access to the voting centers, and he got everybody that voted against the president. He had that record of it and gave it to the regime. So what happened is these motherfuckers went, and everyone who voted against any of the policies that the regime was trying to pass, they would fire them. So, for example, if you worked for anything that had relationship to the government, like these refineries or oil process centers, if you didn't vote for this guy and support it, you're fired. My uncle got fired because he was not going to vote for this guy. My uncle actually came from Cuba. So he fucking was escaping some communism there. He gets to Venezuela, and now they're installing the same shit there. Now, when this shit starts happening, obviously the country starts getting more agitated, and this is when we start seeing protests. Another thing that happened at this time is, for him to be able to control the country more, he didn't want there to be a free exchange of dollars to the local currency. The local currency in Venezuela is called the Bolivar. It has changed the name a bit because there's been so much inflation that they've had to take out zeros. Like, for example, they've had to grab like the $100 bill, and you take out 2 zeros, and now it's $1, right? I don't know, maybe for you guys don't understand what I'm even saying. Like, there's been so much inflation in Venezuela that they had to take out zeros in the coin. And each time they call the coin different, right? So all this happened because of inflation. The country, to be able to pay for shit without really paying for it, you just print more money. But when you print more money, you create inflation, right? So what happens when there's inflation? People try to save their value. So when you see that there's inflation in your local currency, you start buying another currency or another asset that could keep that value, such as gold, dollars, euros, right? Because if your country, right, your third world country is printing money like crazy, you need to convert all your local currency into a currency that actually works and is not being devaluated, right? But the government knows you're going to try to do that. So they make it illegal for you to be able to exchange dollars to the local currency, the Bolivar. So you have to go to the government and ask them for, like, hey, I'm going to go on a trip to Spain for vacation. Can I please have some dollars so that I can go and do this trip? And then the government will give you these dollars at a preferred rate. Now, the government used to say, or still says, that that's the actual value of the dollar in Bolivares. But it's always like a really low price because they want to make it look like the Bolivar is a lot stronger, right? So whenever they compare the Bolivar to the dollar, they would say something like, for example, oh, 1 Bolivar is the same as $1, right? When in reality, if you went to the black market and you wanted to get $1, it was really 1,000 Bolivares instead of 1, right? So if you were able to get approved these dollars from the government to go on a trip or whatever, then you were getting really cheap dollars. right? And so that became sort of a business for many people in Venezuela that I think unintentionally caused a lot of the issues. And I don't blame normal citizens of taking advantage of some administrative shit to get dollars cheaper, buy merchandise outside, bring it, and then bank. Like, I don't blame them for that, but that's how Chavez was able to keep a lot of people without really caring much, because people were like, oh, I'm making money, but it's not really it's not really, what's the word I'm looking for here? It's not really sustainable, because across time, well, I mean, we know it ain't sustainable today because fucking people are dying of hunger, but at the time, we were depending on that oil price to be really high. So what would happen is these motherfuckers would steal 90% of all the money that came in for the oil. I'm literally being for real. It's like 90% of the money stolen to their pocket. If before there was a corruption where they would steal 10% of everything, we could work with that. That's South American standards. No, they were stealing 90%. And the rest of the money, they would go and see like, oh, we're going to do this social program, or we're going to give dollars to the citizens to go on vacation, and we're going to give them the dollars at a really good price. So people are like, oh, okay. And people lived in an illusion for a long time. I was clear about what's happening from the beginning, and I don't know if it's because I lived other places and I was just like, this is all going to shit, you know? So yeah, I mean, eventually the government stopped giving out these dollars at a preferred rate because they didn't even have enough to give it out like that. So now in Venezuela, if you want to buy a dollar, you can get it, but it's expensive as fuck if you want to buy it in the current. If I'm not mistaken, right now, $1 is worth about 1,000,000 bolivares. 1,000,000 bolivares is $1 US dollar. And that's today. And this changes every week. So that figure will be irrelevant soon. So, I mean, it's insane the amount of destruction that they caused. And I mean, I really hope I'm not leaving anything out, at least the importance. I mean, obviously I'm going to leave things out, but I hope that I'm getting across the most important pieces that I think you should hear. And so around 2010, we already have the inflation that's been coming, but now it starts ramping up really bad. Corruption's already been going bad. And what starts happening in a corrupted country like this that was seeing a lot of money, is that all that money that's coming in, you need to also give it to the people that you want to have your back as the regime, prime being. So all this money that you're getting from petrol, you're stealing a lot of it for you and for your homies. But you need to have a lot of homies so that everybody's paid off, If everyone's paid off, then nobody can take you down, right? From the throne. And also, in the past, you had a little bit of a way of paying off the citizens by giving them this preferred dollar, but now you don't have that much. So fuck the citizens. Now you gotta take care of your crew. But what happened is, in 2010, I came here 2015, so we're looking at about 2013, 2012, Chavez dies. And when he dies, Maduro, which is the president that you see now, is the one that took over. And coincidentally, when that happens, the price of petrol went from the numbers that I was telling you, $120 a barrel, to about, 18, 20. So it fucking plummeted. And all that money that they had to bribe everybody and pay everybody off, well, now that money is in there. However, the people that are still there still want to fucking like, hey, where's my money? Because I'm here protecting you and making sure you're there. And we're talking about military personnel, colonels, sergeants, the people that own the fucking guns, the weapons, the tanks and shit. All those people were paid off. Those are the ones you need to have paid off. But as less and less money came to the country because oil was fucking up, well, you had less money to give out. So if there was any money that was given to social or to the citizens one way or the other, like fuck that, cut back, because we need to pay off our homies. even if it's a little bit less. And when I say my homies, I mean the villains, the people that run the scheme. So with less money, there's less food. What the regime tries to do is, if there was a place that sold food, because inflation was so high, prices were high, but it was the only way that you could sell something. If you bought something for 100, you need to sell it for 120 to make a profit. But then the government would come and say, 120, that's so expensive. You're being an abuser. You need to sell that for 30. So then what happened is, well, the people that are gonna produce that product are not gonna produce it if they're gonna sell it at a loss. So what ends up happening? Scarcity. There's nothing for you to buy. So when I left Venezuela when I was 10, in around the year 2000. I came back on 2010, and I was seeing the destruction come down, but I was able to at least go to the beaches, see my friends, family, and I was there for 5 years, and I sort of saw the worst part of it. I left 2015 to Spain, and now 5 years later, even though the country is fucked even more. There's so much poverty. But the government now allows the dollar to be used, because otherwise people would die of hunger, because they have no other way. Like, you couldn't even get cash out of an ATM because they don't have enough cash. Not only they don't have enough cash, the amount of cash that you can take out is only so much physically. But even like a pack of money like this is not even 50 cents. You know what I mean? So you need like a fucking huge duffel bags to just buy an ice cream. So instead, people just use dollars. And the government has had to sort of, look away, because otherwise people wouldn't be able to do commerce, right? So now you can buy anything you want there, pretty much, but it's extremely expensive, right? A country where everything used to be cheap, a country where like 10 years, 20 years ago, you could send $100 a month, and that would be good for your whole family to buy food and pay for shit. Well, now, if I send $100 there, they get less things in a supermarket than what I would get with those $100 in Europe or in the US. So there's not only local inflation, there's also a dollar inflation because of the scarcity of things and because of how hard things are to get there. And this inflation is not affected by the inflation of the dollar. You know what I mean? Like, the dollar isn't being inflated the amount that the prices are being inflated for the things they're selling. It's just that the system is so fucked, it's so hard to get things there that, you gotta pay the price. So now everything is super expensive. Another thing that happened through all these years, that nothing was mayonnaise, right? Did I say nothing was mayonnaise or maintained? Maintained. There was no mayonnaise. There's no mayonnaise. There was no mayonnaise. Maintenance. They didn't maintain shit, dog. I'm telling you. So if you look at infrastructure, bridges, aqueducts, right? Everything that has to do with bringing clean water and black waters out of the city, all the basic shit, electricity for the city, all that, which was set up pretty well 20 years ago, well, now is completely fucked, right? My mom can expect every day to either not have water or not have electricity at her home, right? This is my mom who lives in Venezuela, so I'm telling you about shit that I'm hearing, and obviously this happens today, but this has been happening, even when I lived there 5 years ago, So there's no water, no electricity. So and the fucked up part is, you normally have pumps and wells inside your house to collect water, so that when there's no electricity, so that when there's no water, you still have water saved. But what happens when you don't have electricity? Well, for one, you don't have any light, but for a second, you cannot work the pumps that would get the water from the wells. And if you don't have water coming from the street either, then you're fucked. So living without water and electricity on a daily basis is something that happens. Another thing that is fucked up, all the refineries are fucked. You would think that these motherfuckers would maintain the very thing that keeps their existence going, which is selling oil and gasoline. But no, almost none of the refineries work for gasoline, or if I'm not mistaken, maybe none of them. I do know that at one point we were producing about 3.3 million barrels of oil per day. We were producing and selling, and Dubai was selling 2.9. So we were selling more than them, right? And that was starting in 2000. Look where Dubai is now and what they use all the money. Venezuela was making more per day. And look, where's all that money? Venezuela, all the money that came in Venezuela for oil, you would think Venezuela would be the fucking Switzerland of South America. I mean, I'm talking about everything working. And me personally, I'm cool with social programs if they're efficient. Venezuela had so much money, you could have made it so we had fucking the best universities, the best hospitals, all paid for by oil, inclusive for all Venezuelans. That's what could have happened, because that's how much money was coming into Venezuela. So if you want to sort of make a comparison, in 2000, and you can see online like a video of what happened in the next 10 years in Dubai from 2000 to 2010. And they were making less money per day than Venezuela in oil. We were selling a little bit more than them. That's a shitload of money to disappear. Dubai built a fucking futuristic city. Where's all that money in Venezuela? Where is it? They didn't do anything. They didn't build shit. I've seen it. I've been there. My dad almost died over there, and we didn't have money. We had to take him to a public hospital. Man, this place had no running water. This place, the electricity would go out sometimes. They didn't have the equipment necessary to do blood tests so that they can monitor my dad's condition and see if they could save his life. You know? If I didn't leave the hospital before 5 p.m., I was fucked, because to get to the hospital, you had to pass through a favela. And if they saw my little cute ass, they would have grabbed me and chopped me into fucking pieces, because that was straight up like a hood that was there. So, you know, like, it's insane, like the shit that I saw over there. People eating from the trash, man. Getting sick, because that shit's gonna get you sick. It's gonna get you hepatitis, all types of shit. I'm fortunate that I came from a family that gave me the opportunities, and even when we were fucking broke, we had opportunities to flee, pretty much flee. And I still have, you know, my parents over there in Venezuela. So I vicariously live that anguish through them every day. So remember that gasoline that used to be pretty much free for all of us? Well, I told you the refineries don't work. For a while we were buying the gasoline from the US. The socialist communist regime of Venezuela says that the US are the fucking empire that are trying to fuck with the little man, but they buy gasoline from the US, and the US buys oil from Venezuela. So what happens is, US buys oil from Venezuela, gets that oil and takes it to the Bahamas and different refineries in the Caribbean, makes it into gasoline, which is a lot more valuable. Think about like getting cocaine and turning it into crack. That's sort of what you're doing here, right? You're making that shit the most expensive and valued material. And then the US sells back the gasoline that they made from the petroleum that they bought from us, and they sell it back to us. So it's kind of like, it's kind of like making business with the fucking dumbass of the village, and the Venezuelan regime is a dumbass. But now they're involved in the narcotics business as well. They're pretty much the hub for all the drug to go to Venezuela and South America, and then from Venezuela it gets shipped to Europe, it gets shipped to Africa, and it goes through all these countries that they have, certain relationships with, and that's what's happening, man. I remember, because of the connection they have with Cuba would pay for gasoline. Like Venezuela would send them gasoline, and Cuba would pay it by sending us doctors. Because if you're not aware, Cuba has the best doctors in the world. I mean, these motherfuckers. I mean, talk about fucking Dr. House, fucking Cuban House, dog. I don't understand why people think that Cuban doctors are good. Have you been to a fucking Cuban hospital? Huh? They have equipment from the 1950s, man. What the fuck are you talking about? Cubans are good doctors. Nothing against Cuban people, man. I love Cuban people. But don't bullshit me. When my dad was dying, by the way, my dad is alive today. I love him very much, and he's very well. But he was very close to dying at one point. And we took him because Chavez, in his time, he had all this, grandiose plans of making social programs for everybody. So he made these little centers, like these little medical centers around all the neighborhoods. Meaning, if you had something, before you go to the hospital, you go to these small centers near you. It's more comfortable. And if it's nothing out of the ordinary, then they can help you quickly there. And the hospital is more for more emergencies, right? Like heavy things. And to be honest, the idea seems fine. Like that's how it works in Spain. You have little small centers near you, and then you have the hospitals if you need to go there. So I thought the idea was cool. But then I had to actually use it once. It was in the very late in the evening, right? Like 2, 3 in the morning. My dad couldn't breathe. And he was out of it. He was out of, I'm not going to go really into depth into what was his issue, but pretty much what would happen is he would go out of himself. He wouldn't know who the fuck he was, and he wasn't breathing. Scary time. So we put him in the car. We want to take him to the closest place so that they can give him oxygen. We don't really want to go to the hospital because we have to go at 3 in the morning through the ghetto, through the favelas, and so we take him to this place that I remember this is one of those places that Chavez put. That's one of those centers, right? It always had the face of Chavez. Anything that had to do with the government, you would see all across the city, his face and shit, because he wants to, brand himself on everything that fucking happens. So we go to this medical center, and it's ran by Cuban doctors, right? Because this is a government funded little political, medical center, and we have Cuban doctors, which, by the way, we have a lot of good Venezuelan doctors that we could have given jobs to, but we're giving doctors to jobs to somebody else from another country. But whatever. The doctors there, they were nice people. They were trying to do well, but you could clearly see they were not a doctor as per international standards. You know what I mean? Like, I was telling him, he has this issue. He wanted to give my dad a Xanax, which is, benzodiazepines. And this shit, in the condition that my dad was in, could have killed him if they gave him that, because he could have gone into cardiac arrest. So I told him, no, he cannot take that pill. His doctor specifically said that he cannot take that pill because of the situation he's in. And it seemed to be a common thing, you should know this shit. Everything else that they did to my dad, all the checkups they did, it was as if it was somebody that didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They took his blood for some blood test. When the numbers came back, dude, the answers to the results weren't even, it didn't even make sense, right? If the results had to be milligrams, it was 5 kilos and shit. It just didn't make sense. It wasn't even and they were, I said, they were not bad people, but they just didn't know what the fuck they're doing. So don't tell me about this bullshit Cuban doctors. No. Another thing that, and this is recent, I want to touch now on recent things. My girlfriend needs to get like certain paperwork from the university where she graduated in my hometown in Venezuela. I'm from Valencia, Venezuela. And there's a very, not now, but what used to be one of the best universities in Venezuela and in South America, which is called Universidad de Carabobo. Carabobo is like a place, so it will be like the Carabobo University. But anyways, she graduated from here as an engineer, and she needed to get some shit, and she asked somebody over there, oh, can you go check there, like in the administrative office, if they can get me like a transcript of my fucking grades, like whatever the fuck, anything that easy stuff. You normally pay a fee, wait a few days, and you get that shit, right? Well, it can't be done because the whole, like all the network cables in the university were stolen, right? By thieves, like they were just stolen, like so everything's fucked. So if you need to go graduate and get your diploma, you can't right now, I remember before I left, this was 5 years ago, the university was ran by goons, so much so that I never went to the university, like to study, but I went a few times with a friend to fucking score weed, dog. There used to be this place called La Laguna. Like, go to La Laguna. I'm pretty sure if anybody's still there and doing and fucking slanging and shit, let me know, because that shit is for real. It's called La Laguna, the lagoon, which was behind one of the schools. I don't know if it was a school of lawyers or whatever the fuck, but one of them had a little laguna, and all of the goons from the nearby favelas would go there and sell drugs like cocaine and shit. I mean, I used to just go get some bud, but it was pretty scary times, you know what I mean? I'm talking about my friend having a basketball shirt and the guy saying like, oh, that's a basketball shirt from like another city, like what the fuck are you doing coming here disrespecting us and shit, took out a gun and was like, take that shit off, you motherfucker. And I was just like, oh, what the fuck? Yeah. So that's what I'm talking about, right? You want to talk about law? There's no law. If somebody was to kill you, then you're dead. Nobody's gonna fucking investigate that. There's a 99.9% impunity in Venezuela for all crimes. If you need to go to a public hospital, you cannot get tests done. There's no machines for dialysis. There's no machines for chemotherapy. There's no basic. When I was there, you needed to buy your own syringes, your own things. Now, I don't even know if they have anything that, unless you provide it. Living a life in Venezuela today is already hard. But if you have any problem, then you're living a tragedy, a complete tragedy. If someone has a medical issue, emergency, it's a nightmare. I lived with my dad like a whole year of having him be in hospitals with me, none of us having money, all fucked. Not even having the possibility of finding out if he was getting better because I didn't have a way of doing blood exams in the hospital, So nothing works, So like, you could say that Venezuela is not even today a socialist country, Like, that's what they claim to be. And also, I don't want you to think like, oh, it wasn't applied properly, but if you apply socialism properly, then it works. This is the problem. Socialism, okay, helping people. Yeah, it's nice. You have Nordic countries that have a capitalist motor and then a lot of social programs, right? That bleed the system, but they make enough money to cover the social programs. But they also have a culture of people that acts differently. And if people don't want to accept that culture does matter, it does. You know what I mean? Like, when you go to a Nordic country, and you go to the metro, you don't have to go through anything. I mean, I'm not gonna say every fucking metro. I don't, so I don't want to comment like, well, if you go to the Copenhagen, I'm just saying in general, because I've seen it. You don't have to go through anything because people just fucking behave. There's countries that have a culture where people behave more than others. That's just how it is. So you have a place that behaves really well, you provide social programs that are all administered by people that behave well, and you kind of have a country that just works. But the problem is when not everyone is like that, when you have a big government, you're going to end up having corruption. There's no way around it. There's no way around it, man. If I'm the general that was given the responsibility to do a social program in this town, and they give me $10 million. You can do a lot with $10 million, especially in third world countries, especially in a small town. But what happens is, okay, $10 million. The first guy that gets it is like, well, definitely $9 million are for me. Because the level of corruption is now fucking Vegeta, Dragon Ball level. Like, motherfucker, the Zodiac Knights, whatever the fuck. I'm not gonna steal a little, no, 10 million, 9 million to my pocket. Just cause I'm here, dog. Cause I is. So then we have $1 million left to do the social program, okay? I grab that $1 million and I give it to a contractor. And the contractor says, yeah, for $1 million, man, we're going to do a shitload of things. All right. He grabs that $1 million and he says, shit, this guy probably took some shit off that. $1 million, I'm going to take 500,000. And with 500,000, it should be good to do this. So he grabs 500,000 and he gives 5 people 100,000 to do 5 different parks in the city. And those people that got 100,000, they're like, fuck, I'm keeping 90 and I'll use $10,000 to put a fucking swing and a little slide. And they did that in 5 locations in the town. And I'm giving you an example, of course, but not a real one, but that could be real. I mean, this is the type of shit that happened, right? So what ends up happening in the city? $10 million got you 5 locations where they each have 1 swing and a slide. And that shit happens. That shit happens. I seen in a beach town, they put a little shower head for people to take off water when they go get out of the beach. And that project took $2 million. So you tell me how the fuck you make a faucet for $2 million? You know what I mean? But that's how it is, dog. So when I support small government and in other podcasts that you've listened, it's not because I'm a piece of shit that doesn't want to help people. It's just that unless we're able to figure out how to make it so that motherfuckers don't steal, then it's better for everybody to just keep their money and then use it how they see fit. The bigger the government, the more opportunities the people that work that government have to steal. But if we give them less power, then they wouldn't have anything to steal. Even if they wanted to be pieces of shit, there's nothing to steal, or very little. But, like I said at the beginning, I don't want to get into political, even though this does have to do with the political situation in Venezuela. But I don't want to, get too far off. But hopefully this gave some insights into what it is that's happening over there. I probably missed a lot of things, but it is a very complex situation, and I try to give you like a compressed view of it all. But if enough people care about this topic further and you have questions, I will be super glad to do a second part where we answer questions from the audience, regarding anything I didn't touch or anything that you're wondering. And like I said, I'm gonna give you my honest answer from the shit that I lived, And all that I said today is literally from my experiences living in Venezuela. I protested in Venezuela before I left in 2015 again, and I almost got killed once. There's this famous girl that got killed. I'm not gonna say her name just because, I just doesn't seem right, like, to use her, like, oh, if you know her, fuck it. I'm just saying, there was this girl that the picture was famous because she was being carried out by like a motorcycle right after she got shot, because on the protest the regime will send goons with guns to fight the protesters, right? And the protesters, we were just pacifically protesting, maybe some of them throwing rocks when they were shooting at us. When I heard shots, I was like, yo, what the fuck? I'm out, And there was a girl nearby that got shot, like very close to me. And then a motorcycle picked her up and passed right by me. And then they took that famous picture of her being carried out to the local hospital where she died later. And it's just horrible. A lot of young kids died in the protest. But this is from things that I lived. So if you do want to hear more about this and actually have questions, then leave them there. And I hope you enjoyed the episode. Broski Doodles, stay safe, stay real, and I'll see you next week, my homies.